Welcome back to Holding the Line, a podcast about cops, courts, and crime. I'm Jason Johnson, president of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund, and this is episode 2 with Dennis Spalding on the East Haven 4. So if you have not heard the first episode, go back and listen to that first, and then come back and listen to this episode and hit subscribe so that you don't miss any future episodes of Holding the Line. Now back to Dennis.
The chief state's attorney had investigated Officer Carey's arrest of Father Manship and determined there was no prosecutable crimes that were committed. That's the chief state's attorney's office found no criminal conduct on behalf of Officer Carey.
Father Manship, who was it's a Catholic priest, a parish priest in the area, and he had taken an interest in being an activist on behalf of the Latino immigrant community.
He estimated that about 90% of his church were undocumented immigrants.
Okay, so he took it upon himself. He saw it as part of his role to be an activist, and so he actually inserted himself more than just writing op-eds and speaking to the media. He actually would show up when he thought East Haven police officers were having interactions with members of the Latino immigrant.
Correct. I think he admitted at the grand jury that he followed police around East Haven at least 30 to 50 times, following the police car around during their dangerous duties.
So there was an incident in which Dave Carey, who was one of your co-defendants, found a convenience store. Northeast, you guys call it a bodega, right? But it's basically a convenience store that was apparently illegally selling some of these fraudulent registration.
Yeah, they had over 80 license plates on the back wall with price tags
so
on.
Officer Carey was involved in investigating that at the bodega, and Father Manship, Dave Carey had no idea that this guy was.
No,
Father
David
Manship.
never met them.
He just showed up. It's a white guy wearing a trench coat, right? Is that about?
Correct. So I believe it was about a week earlier, he had showed up on my traffic stop, Father Manship, and he was trying to walk up to my police car while I'm engaged in a traffic stop. And for those that don't know, traffic stops are one of the deadliest situations for police officers. They're very dangerous. So when somebody starts walking up in the middle of a traffic stop, they're interfering with your duties and your ability to focus on the traffic stop to make sure that you are safe and you're going to go home to your family. So he had walked over to my police car while I had a driver pulled over, and I had told him to back away from my police car. He wanted to talk to me. I said, I will gladly talk to you when I am done with the traffic stop, but back up. He went behind my police car and stood about 10 feet away. And I said, you need to back up further. And he kept backing up. And I told him where it was safe for him to film the interaction, me with the driver. I had no problem with him filming me. That was part of his constitutional rights to do so, but he needed to do it from a safe distance. The day at my country store in East Haven is where the 80 license plates, he had again come into the store and walked up to officers while we were engaged in our duties and interjected himself into an investigation that was still ongoing.
And so as a result of that, we don't have to belabor the details, but as a result of that, Officer Carey puts him in handcuffs. He's interfering with what you're doing. He puts him in handcuffs. And then long story short, he's either not charged? Father Manship is either not charged at all, or it's kind of like dismissed or something like that.
Yeah, so the police chief told us to bring him into the station quickly, charge him, and then release him with no bond. Essentially, he went to court and the charges were dropped against him.
Okay. And that interaction became the basis for a federal criminal charge against Officer Carey.
Correct. They said at that moment, Officer Carey entered the conspiracy. That is the only thing he was charged with.
Okay. And that's another case where the state local prosecutor didn't see that as a violation of the criminal law, that action that Dave Carey took.
No.
All right. So that's a lot. I mean, that's a lot of information, but it's a lot about kind of what led up to these charges. What does it feel like when you're a law enforcement officer and you get charged with not only a crime, but federal crime? And in particular, in a situation where you know you didn't do anything wrong.
We felt betrayed by our own federal government. This was their mess caused by an unsecure border. And instead of assisting us, they attacked our town. They attacked our department and they attacked our officers. It was disheartening that they were not coming to help us with this issue that was their problem that they created.
Meaning they created because of allowing...
of their lack of enforcement
and you
securing
were
the
expected
border.
to turn a blind eye as a local police officer sworn to enforce the law, you're then expected to ignore obvious violations of the criminal law. And now because you didn't, now they've turned the sights on you and you're the defendant and you're at risk of going to jail.
Yes.
So, I mean, in addition to that, did you feel fear? I mean, you're a family man. You're married. You have kids. What's going on in your family at the time where you're facing incarceration?
Honestly, we never thought of incarceration. We thought that this was just part of the process, another investigation. We had endured years of investigations. We had endured internal investigations from the police department. The state of Connecticut had launched investigations. The district attorney had launched investigations. The local FBI office had done their investigation, and they've all found no wrongdoing.
You're exonerated.
Exonerated in most cases of whatever was being investigated. So when we were indicted, we just thought it was another step in the process. Although we knew this was political, we thought that, we would be able to come out the other end and the truth would surface and we would be all right. So I never even considered that I would be going to jail.
How did this affect not only your morale on the department while you're on the force, but the rest of the department to know not only this investigation culminates obviously in these charges and everything, but that these investigations have been going on for years? How is this affecting the force's morale and how you guys get your job done on a daily basis, keeping the
They didn't
peace?
want to. No one wanted to do their job. They had given up hope. They felt not supported. Part of me, I still wanted to go out and protect my community, but a lot of officers just stuck to answering the calls for service, and no proactive policing was really being conducted at that time. It was a sad state for the entire town.
So eventually you get your day in court.
Yeah.
And did the government offer you a plea? Was there any offer on the table for you to accept?
I believe they're required to by law, but there was no way I was ever going to accept a plea bargain for things that weren't true.
Yep. So you went to trial.
Absolutely.
What happens at your trial?
I couldn't believe what was happening. I couldn't believe that they were putting on witnesses that would lie. I couldn't believe that the federal government had given immunity to criminals for the crimes that they have committed, felonies, multiple felonies for their witnesses. I just couldn't believe. It felt like the world was flipped around. They were putting a target on law enforcement and coddling criminals and allowing them to speak untruths and fabricated stories. They were allowing people to take the stand and say they did nothing wrong and that everything in our police report was a lie.
And from that, and by the way, this is not, this is a pattern that I picked up from the cases we've been involved in LELDF, especially those that involve, frankly, federal prosecution of local law enforcement officers. There's a pattern of finding witnesses who will say anything because the federal government has so much power to make their cases go away. And they'll say whatever it is that's necessary about the local law enforcement officer to get the government what it wants, which is just, it's essentially its pound of flesh.
So on top of giving immunity to some of their witnesses, anyone that was undocumented involving this case, they gave them legal status in the United States and claimed that they were a crime victim. So now the undocumented immigrants in our case were now had legal status in the United States.
So why wouldn't they go to federal court and say whatever? When they're being given immunity, they're being given a U visa, and they're essentially, you're blessed. You can just stay here and you have lawful permanent status, and any crimes you've committed are forgotten about. I mean, how would they get people to not just jump at that deal? And that's, at the end of the day, all of your cases were based almost entirely on the testimony of witnesses and not on any objective, not on video, not on any other data. You guys weren't sending each other messages about how you're violating people's rights. You're not doing any of that stuff because you're not.
There was no police officer testifying against me with these allegations.
It was just purely people who had been given so much by the government that they couldn't say no. What did your jury do in your case?
They found us guilty of the conspiracy.
And so you all had slightly different outcomes, the four of you, but your outcome, I just want to focus on yours. What was you get convicted, and then of course there's a sentencing.
My daughter was 2 days old. The day the guilty verdict came back.
I even shudder to ask, but I mean, what is that actually emotionally for you?
The first thing I wanted to do was leave the court and go make sure my wife and daughter were okay. That's all I can think about. And then I started planning my life to make sure that they were going to be okay.
I mean, that's a burden that I just can't, it's hard for me to imagine bearing that sort of burden and knowing you didn't do anything wrong to bring this on yourself. What was your sentence?
5 years. because they had added several enhancements on. They added a two-point enhancement. Federal, they have a point system on basically a guideline for how long you should be sentenced. They added a 2-point enhancement on because they said that they had to use significant government expenditures on this case. They had spent millions of dollars prosecuting it. So I should be punished further and get an enhancement because of the amount of money that they spent prosecuting this crime.
Incredible. So sentenced to 5 years.
So they had added up under color of law, which is while you're working as a police officer, which added on a bunch of points. I didn't have any remorse at sentencing, so they added time on for that. I wasn't
You're supposed
sorry.
to be remorseful for something you didn't do.
I was never going to admit to something that I didn't do.
So you get sentenced to 5 years, and how much of that did you serve?
At the end of it, it was about 3 years, 9 months.
Okay. So it's the first 3 years and 9 months of your youngest child's life.
Yes.
Right. And you get out and, I think the next thing to think about is, we've talked in depth about what led to this, but after you get out of prison, federal prison, what is your perspective on life? Like what is it like to be a person who dedicated his life to serving their community, and then you get taken away from your family for almost 4 years, and then now suddenly you're back?
It changed my whole view on life. Like before it was work, work, work. I used to work 60 to 80 hours a week as a police officer, save money. And when I got out, money no longer mattered. Being with my family was the most important thing. Spending time with our family, nothing else mattered. I realized that it could be taken away from you at any time by anyone or any way for any reason, and that I was going to cherish every second I spent with my family from the day I got home to the day I die.
So you're a convicted felon.
Yes.
In the eyes of the law. And so that presents a lot of difficulty to you. Not only practically, there's collateral consequences when you're a convicted felon. It impacts your ability to exercise certain rights, like in some states, the right to vote, right to have even a firearm in your home, and other things, employment consequences and things like that. Those are collateral consequences. And I think most people are familiar with that. But in addition to that, isn't there an emotional consequence?
It feels like something is always following you around. And to have that label put on you, you're automatically judged. Luckily, in our lives, we've been surrounded by people that understand and that don't judge me for what they've read in the paper. Over my life, I didn't mind talking to people about the case if they wanted to know about it. If I have to go one person by one person and explain what happened so that I can get the truth out, then I'll do it one person at a time.
We have been involved in a number of cases where we've sought clemency, pardons, sentence commutations. In your case, we're working to get a presidential pardon for you and your 3 co-defendant colleagues, other officers. You, as you said, you prioritized spending time with your family, and you're able to do that after you were released from prison. But some of the other officers in your case, and I've talked to all of them, couldn't get a job. They served their sentence, and they had various sentences. Yours was the longest, right?
Yes.
Had great, these guys had really, really a great difficulty getting employment simply because in the eyes of the prospective employers, they're convicted felons. And so they have a hard time, even though they serve their communities and so forth. So incredibly difficult, these consequences that are real for you guys. And that's part of what we're really fighting for, is to alleviate those consequences and restore you to where you should have been all along, which is as heroic law enforcement officers who didn't do anything wrong.
The police officers in East Haven were looking out for the best interests of the citizens we served. Ignoring the law was not an option for us. Our job was to keep the people of East Haven safe. We arrested thousands of illegal immigrants driving around with no license, no insurance, fraudulent registration. The crime that was brought in to town needed to be addressed, and instead of ignoring the law, we enforced it. That was our job. We were politically prosecuted for investigating a massive fraud involving illegal immigrants. Thousands of illegal immigrants were involved in this crime. Thousands were arrested by our department. We were wrongfully accused of targeting Hispanics. We were investigating a crime involving illegal immigrants, and we were attacked by our own Department of Justice, who weaponized the department against us and against our town and our police department.
So while you and your fellow officers were away, how was your family received by people of East Haven?
The outpouring of support was overwhelming by the residents and people of East Haven. People had dropped off grocery gift cards for my wife. I remember the mail lady came to the house one time crying and wanted to give my wife a hug. Everyone in the community knew us. They knew all 4 officers. We were very well liked by everyone in the community. We were not rogue officers that were not liked or disciplinary problems. On top of that I had received hundreds and hundreds of cards, my wife, gift baskets nonstop, people always looking to help my wife out, whatever they could do. If she needed help with a babysitter or whatever. At one time, my wife sent me a picture. I almost broke down and cried. But somebody in town, when my son was playing flag football, the numbers for the rest of the kids were simple 1 through 9, single digits. Somebody had remembered that my football number was number 30, and they purchased a jersey and put my football number on my son. So my wife sent me pictures with my son playing with my number 30. That was one of the kindest things that you wouldn't even think about, but people remember. The town was very supportive. The residents of our town were very supportive. Most of the activists and protests came from the city of New Haven. They would come into East Haven and they would have a protest. A lot of people, they did fundraisers for our families. They were selling T-shirts that they support the police department. They had wrote tons of op-eds in the newspaper. Some of the headlines were "So sick of racial profiling claims," "Dangerous accusations," "Police were enforcing the law, not profiling." People in town knew it wasn't true, and they knew the accusations levied against us by the Department of Justice and the activists were unfounded.
Dennis Spalding, thank you so much for joining us on Holding the Line. It's been a pleasure to learn, really in depth more about your case. It's obvious and it comes through. You're a good man, and what happened to you was wrong, very wrong. And what happened to your other 3 co-defendants and colleagues and friends was just as wrong. And we're going to work as hard as we can at the LELDF to right this wrong and work toward getting President Trump to formally pardon all 4 of you. And I can't wait until that day comes. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for everything you do for me, my family, the other 3 officers, and the law enforcement community. It's a blessing to have an organization like you around sticking up for police officers.
Thanks for joining Holding a Line for our really in-depth interview with Dennis Spalding. And I hope you join me in thinking it was just fascinating to hear from his perspective everything that happened. And if you feel, as we feel, that Dennis and other East Haven 4 officers got a raw deal and really need to get clemency and should get a presidential pardon, please help us by sharing Dennis's story, telling your friends about our podcast. Help us share the story of the East Haven 4 and the injustice that they received. That is the way that we're going to get this done, is by just making as many people aware of it as possible. Most people are not aware of it. So we're trying to inform everyone as much as possible. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.